moment to review how this meeting will work. We want to allow for all participation by board members, staff, and members of the public who wish to comment. However, it is essential that we are able to manage the conversation effectively. I am chairing this meeting today from the DCR offices in downtown Richmond. I have with me Christine Watlington-Jones, Blair Gordon, and Michael Fletcher. They will assist with presentations, responding to comments, and overall coordination of the meeting. Please be patient with all of us as we work through this. We understand and appreciate the challenges. Chapter 56 of the 2020 Special Session Number 1 Acts of the Assembly, also known as the Budget Bill, includes language addressing the ability of public bodies to conduct electronic meetings without the need for a quorum being present in a single physical location, known as electronic meeting. The Budget Bill allows public bodies to hold electronic meetings when the governor has declared a state of emergency pursuant to Code 44-146.17. If, number one, the nature of the declared emergency makes it impractical or unsafe for the public body or governing board to assemble in a single location, and two, the purpose of the meeting is to discuss or transact the business statutorily required or necessary to continue operations of the public body and the discharge of its lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. Subsection 4-0.01 Gulf. The Budget Bill also has language regarding recordings and transmissions of electronic meetings. Please be advised that this meeting is being recorded. This recording will be available to the public through the DCR website. The comments in the chat room will also be preserved as a public record. Official minutes of this meeting will be drafted and posted in accordance with the regular procedures. The Budget Bill does not allow the board to hold an electronic meeting to discuss or transact business for any purpose. Rather, they may do so as long as the agenda items on the public body plans to take up are A, statutorily required, and B, necessary to continue operations and discharge lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. It is the board's responsibility to determine whether the nature of the declared emergency makes it impractical or unsafe for the public body or governing board to assemble in a single location. At the conclusion of my remarks, I will ask for a motion for the board to make this determination. If that motion fails, this electronic meeting will end at that point. The Budget Bill requires compliance with the provisions of Code 2.2-3708.2. Therefore, in accordance with 2.2-3708.2 Delta 2, public bodies must include a telephone number that may be used to notify the public body of any interruption in the telephonic or video broadcast of this meeting. In the event that a disruption occurs, participants should contact Mr. Fletcher by phone or text at 804-317-8934. We will put that in the chat box. Additionally, if there is an interruption in the broadcast, the meeting must be suspended until public access is restored. Those provisions of the Freedom of Information Act not addressed by the Budget Bill remain in effect. Before we continue to do the business portion of this meeting, I will ask Mr. Fletcher to call the roll of board members and anticipated staff. Other participants will be recorded through the chat window. If you are participating by phone or your name is not called, please call or text Mr. Fletcher at 804-317-8934. In addition, if at any time you lose connection or are unable to reconnect, please contact Mr. Fletcher at the same number. I will now turn to Mr. Fletcher to call the roll.
Mr. Arneson.
Here.
Mr. Albritton. Ms. Saki-Blanc. She is actually having trouble signing on. I got an email, so she will be here momentarily.
Okay.
Dr. O'Brien.
Here.
Ms. Mason.
She's muted, but she's here.
Okay. Mr. Wilson.
Here.
Mr. Newton.
Here.
Ms. Mabry? Mr. Ford?
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you do have a quorum.
I don't think Pam's having a hard time. She's trying to get our attention.
Okay, while we're doing that, I'll proceed. The recommended motion is the Virginia Soil Water Conservation Board certifies that the nature of the declared COVID-19 emergency makes it impractical or unsafe for the board to assemble in a single location, and further that the agenda items to be taken up at this meeting are necessary to continue operations and discharge lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities of the board. The chair will entertain that motion. Would someone care to move that?
This is Adam Wilson. I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second, Charles Newton.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? The motion has been moved and seconded. I will ask Mr. Fletcher to call the roll. If you are in favor of the motion, say aye. Opposed, no.
Mr. Arneson?
Aye.
Ms. Psyche-Blanc? Dr. O'Brien?
Aye.
Ms. Mason?
Muted.
I think you muted Ms. Mason. I'm not sure why.
Giving him a thumbs up.
Okay, we got that. Thank you. Thank you.
That counts.
Mr. Wilson?
Aye.
Mr. Newton?
Aye.
Mr. Ford?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the motion carries.
Thank you very much. I want to explain further how we will handle participation by board members, staff, and the public. Everyone except the individual presenting materials for an agenda item will be muted. Once the presentation is completed, the board members and only the board members will be unmuted for discussion. Michael, Christine, and Blair will assist me with ensuring board members are recognized when they have questions or comments. As needed, staff will unmute to address questions or concerns. Members of the public will be able to ask questions and provide input by utilizing the chat box function only. As time allows, we will respond to those questions and comments. We will now proceed with the business of the board as outlined in the agenda. The first agenda item is the approval of the minutes of the December 16, 2020 meeting. You all have a copy. What's the board's pleasure?
This is Mr. Newton. I would move approval of the minutes.
Second,
We have
Adam Wilson.
I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I will call the roll. I will have Michael call the roll.
You're welcome to. Mr. Arneson?
Yes.
Ms. Psyche-Blanc? Dr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Ms. Mason?
She said yes.
Okay. Mr. Wilson?
Aye.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the motion carries.
Thank you very much. Next on the agenda is the director's report.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I'm going to limit my report again because of the nature of the electronic meeting to only the businesses directly related to statutory responsibilities of this board. But I'm going to start out by talking about what was a very productive General Assembly session. And I want to note that I see that Mr. Jason Powell from the Senate Finance and Appropriations Committee, as well as Mr. David Reynolds from the House Appropriations Committee, are both joining us today on the meeting. So I want to welcome them to the Virginia Soil and Water Conservation Board, and I want to thank both of them for their assistance in what has been a very active and productive General Assembly session that convened that adjourned, I believe, not quite 2 weeks ago, and we'll be coming back for the reconvened session on the budget. But I wanted to just go over what is in the budget, Mr. Chairman, because for the next 3 months, this board has the statutory responsibility for the allocation of the funding So first of all, starting with what was in the governor's introduced budget, you might recall, as I had presented to you before, there was a total of about $30,350,000 from the Water Quality Improvement Fund statutory deposit. And within the breakdown of that, there was $500,000 reserved for matching the CREP program. There was $500,000 reserved for the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program run by the Virginia Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts. There was $1 million for the special non-point source reduction projects that includes RMPs, poultry litter transport, as well as nutrient management plans. There's $250,000 for the new small farm outreach program. That is part of an effort ongoing with Virginia State University to help us reach out to smaller farmers and particularly minority-owned farms. There was a new initiative of $500,000 for the Department of Forestry for the Virginia Trees for Clean Water project, as well as the traditional $250,000 for forestry silvicultural practices. There's $1 million in a clean water financing and assistance program to be administered by DEQ, which is a pay for documented performance program for innovative nutrient reduction strategies such as bioreactors. There was $100,000 for the Department of Health for evaluation of septic tanks, failing septic tanks. And then $250,000 for the department to continue to develop and maintain the conservation suite application that is so critical to us being able to get all the data that we have to report to the EPA. So there was a total of $4.35 million that was in the introduced budget. I'm pleased that the General Assembly approved all of that and also approved all of that and then improved on that, particularly with the VCAP program by adding another $500,000 to that program. So that $4.3 million came off the top of the statutory deposit of $30.3 million, and that left $26 million for funding for ag BMPs. That was divided $18.2 million in the Bay Watershed and $7.8 million outside the Bay Watershed. In addition, the governor's budget included a $9 million supplemental deposit specifically for BMPs that added $6.3 million in the Bay Watershed and $2.7 million for BMPs outside the Bay Watershed. One of the most important things that we've been working on is ensuring the baseline funding for technical assistance for the districts at $4.55 million, and that's based on the study we did a couple years ago with the General Assembly of a recommended minimum baseline BMP program of $35 million. The nice thing is that the General Assembly approved all of this and then some. The General Assembly added an additional $30 million for BMPs, and out of that $30 million, there's an additional $3.9 million that's reserved for technical assistance for the district. So again, it's gotten us back up to a level more similar to where we were, and this is all for FY22. I also would note that the recordation fee, which has been appropriated at $10 million, as you know, Mr. Chairman, I believe have only been budgeting about $7 to $7.5 million of that because it is a volatile source of income. The good news is the real estate market is booming, and what I can tell you is that for FY21 and going into FY22, it's quite likely that we could meet the level of appropriation of the $10 million with that fee. So that is again still in there, and I believe the base out of that is $1.3 million that goes for technical assistance. So in other words, overall, you have a lot of work ahead of you because of the fact that we continue to see significant support. And again, I want to thank Jason and David for joining us today, and thank you for your support throughout the session. Mr. Chairman, I would also mention a couple of items that were in the governor's budget. They had been approved by the General Assembly last year, but because of the uncertainty of our revenues, due to the COVID epidemic, they were frozen, but they have now been reapproved by the General Assembly, and that is for us to add a lead dam safety engineer in the dam safety program, very much so needed position, as well as 2 additional floodplain planner positions. And so we're going to be moving forward with those as well. And then, Mr. Chairman, just reminding everyone too, I know the board has approved the plan to move forward with the $15 million that was provided specifically for the rehabilitation of district dams that had been added back in during the special session, and the General Assembly left that appropriation intact as well. So that's my overview as far as the budget is concerned. I will also, Mr. Ford asked specifically for an update on the whole farm approach program, and I want to mention that to you because this will be something that the board will be discussing in more detail probably in the April and May meetings. Just a reminder, the whole farm approach is basically bundling certain practices, core and precision nutrient management and cover crop practices into one cost share contract with a guarantee that all the applicable whole farm approach BMPs will receive cost share funding in return for enrolling the entire farm, all the acres of the farm in the program. And there are several components of the WFA that you have approved in the past, and I'm sure we'll be reviewing those in more detail. But Mr. Ford, specific to your question, for FY 2020, it was just slightly over $2 million that ended up covering about 81,500 acres. We expanded on that in FY 2021 to 3.5 million, almost 3.6 million. And that expanded us to 89,500 acres. And as you will be hearing, and this is all in the Three Rivers Soil and Water Conservation Districts, that we will be proposing additional funding for FY22 in your upcoming deliberations. But just want to give you a sense of the results here. In the Three Rivers Soil and Water Conservation District, we have increased the agronomic acres in the VAX program from roughly 75% to somewhere between 90 and 95%. And so if we're going to meet our Chesapeake Bay goals, this is the kind of approach that is going to be really critical. Related to that, we have a couple of pending projects. The Thomas Jefferson Soil and Water Conservation District has partnered with DCR, and we have applied again to the USDA for the RCPP grant. We've applied for up to $8 million, but we'll certainly take what we can get. And that is for a project proposal for a 4-county area that would be both crop and pasture to expand the whole farm approach there. And then for the Eastern Shore Soil and Water Conservation District, we have been approved by the EPA for a Chesapeake Bay supplemental grant of about $976,000 that will include both the whole farm approach as well as the resource management plan approach. We have submitted a work plan to EPA, and hopefully that project will be getting underway soon, and we'll be providing you with additional updates on that. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions that any members of the board have, but for today, that's my report.
Thank you very much, Clyde. Are there any questions for the director?
None on the chat.
None on the chat. All right, we'll move on. And I want to thank everyone who contacted their legislator supporting our soil and water conservation. I think we were very successful this year. We'll keep it up. Next order of business is the Lake Barcroft Watershed Improvement District budget. And would that be Christine?
It would be Christine. Just struggling trying to find all of the agenda items. There are lots. This board reviews the Lake Barcroft budget every year. It's submitted by the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District. For this year, Lake Barcroft anticipates a balance of $1.4 million distributed among 4 reserve funds, operations, dredging and silt disposal, general capital, and dam renovation. They expect to collect property taxes of about $1.29 million, which is about a 3% increase over FY 2021, which is still within the 3.5% inflation rate expected by the community. There will be some other available modest income sources, which will provide a total of $2.7 million in available funds. Lake Warcraft is expecting to expend about $1.466 million in FY22. About $792,000 are for operating expenditures. Those are the personnel, administration, overhead, environment, maintenance, and equipment. $500,000 for dam renovation projects, including ingress and egress improvements to the WID operational facility. $100,000 for dredge and silt removal. $75,000 for general capital expenditures, including the biennial recertification of the dam. An ending balance of $1.266 million is expected. You have a recommended motion. I don't know if there are any questions of the board.
Are there any questions of the staff? The recommended motion is that the Soil and Water Conservation Board approve the Lake Barcroft Watershed Improvement District FY 2022 budget as submitted by Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District and presented by the department. Would someone care to move that motion?
Mr. Chairman, this is Pam Mason. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I make that motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Kristen Saki-Flunk, second.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll ask Michael to call the roll.
Mr. Arneson,
Yes.
Ms. Saki-Blunt,
She says
Yes.
yes.
Dr. O'Brien,
Yes.
Ms. Mason,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson,
Aye.
Mr. Newton,
Yes.
Mr. Ford.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the motion carries.
Thank you. The next agenda item is the cost share manual amendments. There's quite a few pages there. We don't approve them until later, but we're introducing them for everybody's questions and discussions. Christine?
Yeah. All right. Y'all got a ton of files related to the Ag BMP manual. We present them to everybody in March, and then they are up for approval in April. So this really is a review. Let us know if you have any questions, comments, concerns with any of the recommendations. The first part is really just about the BMP specifications. So that's what I'll focus on right now. Just to remind everybody, usually all of these recommendations are discussed, revised through the Ag BMP TAC process. Obviously, 2020 was a little bit different with the limitations on meetings and social distancing. We had to try a different approach. So with the exception of one specification, which we'll talk about in a second, all of these revisions and were handled through a webinar format. All of the suggestions, every year we get suggestions from districts and partners and others. All the suggestions are then sent out to subcommittees. We have 4. So each of those suggestions in 2020, the department looked at the suggestions and then made recommendations either to go along with the suggestion, to defer the suggestion, or table the suggestion. Those recommendations for each of the subcommittees were presented in a webinar format. After the webinar, there were 2 weeks for a public comment period. And then at the end, in December, we had a full TAC webinar to explain all of the recommendations as well as any revisions we had made to any of the recommendations based on the comments we had received earlier. There was one exception to the webinar format, and that was the development of a portable stream fencing specification. That was actually required by the, quote, Bay bills that passed in 2020. It required the development of a specification through the Ag Bnp TAC process and required a specification to be included in the FY 2022 manual. Because it was specified in code as a statutory responsibility, that the development of that specification was actually held through the electronic meeting process. The Stream Protection Subcommittee met twice to discuss, revise, develop, and then vote on the specification. And then the full TAC had an electronic meeting to formally vote on that specification. That specification actually was voted and approved unanimously. So I'm not sure everybody loves it, but everybody understands the need for it and also understands that we can revise it in the future if it's warranted. So that's sort of the overview of how things went this year. There's some key changes to the manual. Although truly many of the suggestions were either deferred because we want the subcommittee's input and recognize that either the subject needs more technical expertise or needs more buy-in or different viewpoints would be helpful to talk about, or many of the suggestions were also tabled. Either we've dealt with them before, they conflict with other provisions in the guidelines, something along that line. Many of the changes were clarifying. Either they conflict with statements later in the specifications, the language confuses, or we've clarified the language to actually represent what happens in the field. One big one, we actually, I think this has been on hold for 2 years now. Cover crop planting dates have actually been extended for about 15 days in most areas to account for the longer growing season. It was on hold last year while we talked to DEQ. After discussions with DEQ and others, the decision was made to move forward with that suggestion. So you'll notice that the cover crop specifications have revised dates in them. Obviously, we have a portable stream fencing specification now included in the packet. And then there are, each specification in the bottom has some generic language related to certain technical expertise, like who can help with this specification, or many of them have language that's relevant to tax credits and whether or not that BMP is actually eligible for tax credits. There were 2 bills in this session that actually changed the amount available for agricultural BMP tax credits. So we have revised the language in the bottom of the specification. It's standard, so it's in almost every single one now, to just reflect that the Code of Virginia allows tax credits for the implementation of BMPs. It doesn't get too much more specific than that because there are 2 scenarios that impact the amount that a person is eligible for and the amount a person is eligible for under those BMP tax credits. But those are the big changes related to the specifications themselves. So if there are questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Or we can move on.
Are there any questions for staff?
Mr. Chairman, this is Pam Mason. I have a question, and I apologize because being a newbie, some of this, I recognize all the acronyms, but I have a very, very basic question. So who comprises the Virginia Agricultural BMP TAC? Who are those folks?
So they are stakeholders and partners. There are district technical staff. There are district directors. You actually have at least one fellow board member on that TAC. The agricultural industry groups are on it. Poultry Federation, Farm Bureau, Agribusiness Council. You've got environmental groups, Chesapeake Bay Foundation, James River Association, Chesapeake Bay Commission. It's a large group. Additionally, you may have certain members that serve at a subcommittee level, and then may not serve at the full TAC level. So we structured it so each organization has a vote at the full TAC level, but not necessarily every individual. So you may actually have, a district may have one rep at a TAC level, but have their technical person and then a district director serving on two different subcommittees. So that's who the breakup usually is.
Is the makeup of the membership codified?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So
Which
self-appointed.
actually allows us additional flexibility for members who want to serve. Some districts have always been involved, others have not been involved, but it allows us to sort of reinvent the TAC as issue comes in, or if we need to pull additional resources, we can absolutely do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, this is Clyde. If I could just add, I think our goal is to be as inclusive as possible with the TAC. I don't think we turn anyone away. Ms. Mason, I will tell you, I did attend one of the meetings just out of curiosity, and I don't know what the acronyms were, so I think they were speaking, but they do, they literally, no pun intended, they do get into the weeds, and they will spend hours and hours discussing these very complex issues. But I'd encourage you, if you'd like to join in one of the TAC meetings, and I'm hoping maybe later this year we can actually get them back in person.
Well, thank you for that, because I am interested. I don't know how that happens. You know, if it's organic or because I guess I'm curious as to how maybe they're advertised. I haven't noted any information being sent, like for instance, to the list that we get from Michael for the board. So I'm assuming there's a whole nother process, and maybe I don't want to get involved. But I'm just raises my curiosity as how that happens. I'm a process person, so thank you for that.
So just to sort of answer, David Bryan is actually responsible for organizing the TAC. He sends out emails to all of our partners who have participated before, as well as a lot of the information actually goes out through the all district email that the association runs. All of the meetings are posted on the town hall, just like this board meeting is. So
Great, that's perfect. I am one of the all district distributions, so perhaps they're coming through that way. That's great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I can attest to the fact that we have never turned a member away. and it gets bigger and bigger all the time, but we invite all input. So, okay, moving on. Next agenda item is, go ahead.
I do have one more question, and I know we're just starting to look at these, but we're going to have about a month before before the changes might be approved and incorporated. I did note a couple questions that I would like to hear a little bit more about. Item 7D, which is the definition of ag land. So the production has been changed from a minimum of 5 years to a minimum of 3 years, and I was just kind of curious if, maybe a little bit behind that. And then the only other thing I noted was there's the live stream, so LS, which refers to live stream, and I'm wondering how that relates to perennial, because it seems like that practice is the one that we just approved, determination of perenniality, and I'm wondering where the crosswalk is between the definition of live stream and perennial.
Okay, two things. One, I was going to talk about the expand the lifespan in the next section, because it's actually part of the guidelines, not the specifications, but I can tell you now. A recommendation and suggestion has come through several years in a row to some degree to allow newer farmers to participate. The 3-year requirement actually aligns with the time frame requirement that's used for local tax assessment that allows land to be taxed at the agricultural rate when it's been in production for 3 years. So that loosens that requirement up a little bit. Live streams, David, correct me if I'm wrong, please, but I think that actually went into effect last year and is included in all of our livestock stream exclusion practices. It actually doesn't necessarily have anything to do with perenniality determination. It was a way to try and define for technical district staff things that they need to pay particular attention to when they are out on the field and designing, determining which practices are most effective. As I said, that was approved, I believe, last year by the TAC and is included in all of the stream specs. It really is just a clarification. It does not hold regulatory weight in any program besides this.
That is all correct, Christine.
Thank you.
Okay, it's interesting, I suspected that the reason the change in the ag definition was shortened was for new practitioners. I just was wondering if that change would affect existing programs by minimizing that, if it would allow for lots of continuity in production as a verification of the practice. It's the only thing. Thank you.
You broke up a little bit. I think this was your question. I think I can answer what I think you meant. I don't think the definition that was adopted in the guidance document actually will prevent the VAX program currently from operating the way it is now.
Perfect.
Are there any other questions or comments from the board?
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is Charles Newton. Christine, is the changes to the average cost list part of the manual as part of this item?
No, it'll be next.
Okay. I do have a question I sent to you on chat for when we get to that, but thank you.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Are there any more questions about the specifications specifically? Okay, then I'm going to move on to the guidelines because those are the more broad programmatic changes.
I don't see Mr. Newton's comment in the chat. He must have sent it to you privately.
Okay.
FYI.
All right. Couple of things in the guidelines section, one of which I think is in a different section, but I'll include it here. We are recommending that the participant cap be increased to $150,000. That actually falls in line with many of the variance requests that we've received. That seems to be sort of a dollar figure that sort of ranks. We've had a couple that are more than that, but for the most part, they're either right around 150,000 or less than. So that seems to warrant an increase in the amount of cost share available to ensure that some of the larger practices are funded and ranked and are able, the producers are able to receive assistance to implement those practices. We can go ahead and do the average cost list if I can find it. We originally sent, this is on page 9 of the manual, and then yesterday we sent, I think it was yesterday, Michael sent out a revised version that I requested. Don't necessarily worry about the many colors on this document. I will tell you, for the most part, the blue is what we originally sent y'all with the manual changes. Just a little bit of background. Average cost list, most districts have them, if not all. It does reflect the current policy and procedures. Having an average cost list ensures that each cost estimate is calculated in the same manner and that each participant is treated equitably by the program. It is a component of the district's financial audit. Over the last, it's really been 2 to 3 weeks, districts have come to the department with increased concerns about the unexpected increase in material costs. For the most part, at the moment, we're talking about lumber, but I don't know that it's going to stay lumber, given the, it could just as easily go to plumbing materials, given what's happened in Texas, Mississippi and Louisiana this winter. We wanted to provide an opportunity for districts when it is an unexpected and really material cost increase to adjust their average cost list if they needed to during the program year. Right now, they're not allowed to adjust the annual cost list during the year to make sure everybody is treated fairly, and to keep some continuity within the program. We've made recommendations, that's most of the language in red, about the process that districts would need to follow to increase their annual cost list. It is not an easy process, because truthfully, while we want this to be used when it is absolutely necessary, as opposed to we're worried about a certain, we maybe didn't take this into account when we should have in July. Like, this really is, lumber prices have now doubled. We can't fund people to install their animal waste practices. It would require approval from DCR, and would require that the district amend every active contract that is impacted by this increased cost to ensure that everybody receives the same relative amount of cost share that they should. Charles, you said you had a question.
Yes, it was in number 5, says if the request to amend, that it will affect every active contract. And I just wondered if that meant prior year contracts as well as current year.
Blair tells me it should be current year only. I can make that amendment.
Say the answer again.
It should be current year only. I can make that amendment.
Okay.
To make it more clear that it's every, I'll figure out how to write it, but that it would be for that year's approved active contracts. It shouldn't be for carryovers.
Yeah, that would make it clearer. You're right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Also about number 5. So I'm wondering if there's any opportunity for efficiencies here, where if one district goes through the effort to get a change in the average cost, and recognizing that things aren't necessarily uniform across Virginia, but is there some opportunity or advantage there where other districts can also be eligible for that change in cost, or that information might be shared so that they don't have to go through at least the first 4 items in the list?
We can talk about it. I think the hesitation will be that many of these costs are truly regional.
But things like stone, for it, yeah, well, yes, I understand, but regional in the sense of physiographic province, probably regional, not so much district by district. I mean, a lot of the commodities are going to be coming from certain places, and so those costs are going to be fixed, or they're going to be affected by drivers, economic drivers that are much bigger than Virginia, for instance.
Correct. The other thing is, truthfully, it may. Go ahead.
I just think it's worth a conversation.
Yeah.
To add, because you figure out it's kind of a complicated and slightly laborious process. When I read it, I was like, ooh. And so I'm just looking for efficiencies for the other district, for other districts, if somebody, goes through the effort.
Also, just because so districts are expected or have been encouraged to include a contingency cost in their contracts. So this is when your contingency costs no longer cover your contract because of the materials.
I understand.
I know. So I'm just making sure that there's a reason this is a laborious process.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, I get it. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be. I'm not questioning the process. What I'm suggesting is maybe there's an opportunity for some efficiencies among districts, or maybe within or something.
Okay.
Any further questions?
Oh, it was an observation really more than a specific question. Thank you.
Thank you.
For the most part, the other changes in the guidelines were really changes to how things get inputted into the Bnp tracking program. That's true under the completion dates and carryover practice status, which is pages 41 through 43, pages 45 and 46 that deal with extreme acts of nature. Even to some degree, pages 47 through 48 about transferring a BMP cost share instance or contract. Although for that one, the added benefit is that it actually provides a much more secure way for the department and the district to protect Social Security numbers when you're transferring contracts between producers or entities. So that was actually the driving thought behind many of those changes, was to add some additional protection to Social Security numbers.
Are there any further questions on the guidelines? Tax credits. Tax credits.
As I mentioned a little while ago, there were 2 tax credit bills that impacted the Bnp tax credit, which this board actually had some responsibility for. There was another bill that impacts a different set of tax credits that's related to the purchase of equipment, either for conservation, tillage, or fertilizer equipment. All of the changes in the manual are related to the passage of those bills. I don't know that the governor has signed one of them. Some of them have been signed. I don't know that he's finished signing the others. We're not anticipating amendments or vetoes on any of them. But that is the driving force behind all of the revisions in the tax credit section, was the passage of those legislative proposals.
Any questions on the tax credit guidelines? Moving along.
Over the years, we have, and more recently, we have worked with FSA to increase the communication, cooperation, and efficiency of the CREP program. The recommended revisions to this section reflect the process that DCR and FSA and the districts have, to some extent, have adopted over the last year to try and ensure that this program runs more smoothly, and to make sure that all the resource reviews are completed correctly, that funding is approved in the recommended order, and that districts know what's going on, and FSA agents and NRCS know, and the central office. So the changes really are based on that new process that we have all agreed to improve the program.
Are there any questions on the board? Poultry litter transport. That's pretty simple, isn't it?
Yep.
Yep. It's double.
Yes. we are recommending an increase on the amount of poultry litter that is allowed to be transported to 800 tons. What's that? You still, however, an additional requirement is that the fields eligible for payment do not exceed the maximum phosphorus and nitrogen application rates established in the Virginia Nutrient Management Standards and Criteria. The nitrogen is a new requirement.
Any questions on that?
Mr. Chair, this is Pam Mason. I have one question. On the bottom of page 7-5 or VII 5, item I, or the top of that page rather, item I, in the lower coastal plain, New Kent is not on that list. Is there a specific reason why New Kent isn't on that list?
Why it is or is not?
I. It's not under I, not G. Not G. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. There, that one. Northumberland,
Daryl?
Lancaster, Kansas.
Can I call on you, please? I thought he was on.
He was.
Under G, wasn't it already eligible for a higher amount?
Let me see. So under G, we have Accomack, Upper and Lower Coastal Plain, which includes New Kent, Charles City, two of the areas that I work in my district. And then Rockingham and Page is the next list. And then you go to the one with the reduced tonnage valuation, and you get Page and Rockingham, you get Middle and Upper Coastal Plain and Ridge and Valley. Then you come back down to the lowest rate, which is the $7.50 a ton from Page and Rockingham. So moving stuff from the Shenandoah to the coastal plain, and it doesn't include Charles City, it doesn't include New Kent. I'm sort of curious if that was a mistake, or if there was an incomplete thought there, or there's a real rationale why in those coastal plain eligible ones that some of those are missing.
I think it was deliberately done. I think it was a rational decision. But I don't hear Daryl. So can I get back to you with the answer?
Christine,
Sure.
Clyde, I see Daryl is on the line, but maybe he's having audio problems. Maybe he could answer in the chat.
Either way, that would be great, or following along. I'm just curious because conceptually it seems like, unless it has something to do with the innate nutrient levels of the soils in those locales, which would be why I would think it might not be there, but I would really like to hear more about that.
I would agree that it's probably partially, if not wholly, the reason, but I will, if Daryl doesn't answer, I'll get an answer back to you.
Okay.
A general question on poultry litter transport. Is the 800-ton limit for any particular farm wanting to use that much?
I didn't hear the first part of your question, Charles.
Is the 800-ton limit for any particular farm that wants to have that much litter developed to that, delivered to that farm? Is that the way that limit is imposed?
I think that is currently a threshold that they are frequently seeing, and as long as the nutrient management plan allows for it, and the soils are still within the range, I think there's a justification as long as they are in compliance with their nutrient management plans and the soils can account for it and remain within the testing limits they're supposed to. I don't know that there is a reason why you cannot allow the 800 pounds or 800 tons, especially if that seems to be a limit that producers are currently running.
This is Jay Ford. Is this the limit, or was this the targeted goal for the WIP in terms of the transport needed, or are we expecting additional increases to the size and scope of this program to meet that goal?
My understanding is that we, and Daryl, I know you're chatting, I think we need far more. I think this is more of a producer functional limitation rather than a WIP goal limitation. My understanding is we need to transport far more litter than this.
Is the agency making recommendations on sort of the amount of increased appropriation versus farm capacity? I know when we had this conversation on the Eastern Shore, one of the shortages, difficulties was the equipment for spreading. And I don't really know what a reasonable scale up time is until we are where we want to be here. But are you envisioning a 2 to 3 year plan, or are we on like a 5 to 10 year buildup?
Daryl is saying we're not expecting additional increases in tonnage. The 800 tons is based on our experience with the program. We need to transport 89,000 tons per year by 2025, and we're having more of a problem finding people to haul the litter. I know that's especially true coming over from the Eastern Shore.
Yeah, I noticed we had a higher rate out of Accomack. So is that something that the agency is looking for solutions on, the hauling portion?
I know there have been conversations about how to address it and how to encourage haulers. I don't know that we have come up with a perfect recommendation for that. The other thing I can say is, I think I have this right. Clyde, correct me if I'm wrong. The budget bill, an amendment, it was $1 million for poultry litter, RMPs, and nutrient management plans this year for FY22 instead of the $750,000 that we got in FY21, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So that would potentially allow, and we're still working through all of this, but that would potentially allow additional monies to be spent on poultry litter transport, depending on what the needs are for for those funds. Sarah also said, just as a heads up, in FY21 we obligated $350,000 for this program. So there is potential that, depending on what the needs are for the rest of that block of funds, we may be able to ramp up if it's necessary.
Christine, Mr. Chairman, this is Adam Wilson. Can I just say a few things on the chicken litter deal? Looking here, hauling chicken litter from Rockingham and Page counties all the way down here in the Ridge Valley, sort of in my area, here especially in Washington County, where I live. I actually live right behind the largest egg producer in the state of Virginia. I don't know the feasibility of trucking chicken litter in all the way to Washington County, Russell County, the lower end of Virginia down here, when we've got an abundance, I guess you could say, ourselves, just to create a problem in another area. Is there any way we can, and I'm good neighbors with these people, and I know, I don't know about trucking litter and disease. Chickens are very vulnerable to stuff, and that's one thing that worries me. I don't know. I know it'll come to a time that litter will come out of the valley all the way down in our area, just on account there's nowhere else to go with it. But me personally, and watching out for the economy of my area and the farmers in my area, I'd almost say I'd like to see Washington County at least come off of this list. Is that something we could do? I don't know.
I can ask. We
I'm
can talk
sorry.
about it.
Did you say that you would like to see Washington County come off of the list?
Yes, I would. I mean, here in Washington County, in Area 4, we've got the largest egg producer in the state, right here in our county, which supplies Washington County, which I know they're trucking litter all the way into Tennessee and North Carolina out of here, just because there's not enough area here to even get rid of the poultry litter that we have in our county alone. So I don't see, trucking litter all the way to here when we're already having to truck litter out of our area as well. And it's not so much the litter, it's the disease that I worry about when you've got that many million birds sitting right here. And then let's say, for example, I get poultry litter from up in the valley and there could be some disease in it. Well, I wipe out their entire block.
Yeah, so the way that I understand this program, and again, Daryl, this is Kristen Saki-Blunt. I thought this was largely around getting the poultry litter to nutrient deficient counties, so where you don't have the same the same concentration of phosphorus in the soils, to places where it potentially could be of value, particularly when I think about some of the reclamation lands areas in Virginia and acid mined drainage where there's a deficiency in nutrients. So I recognize that it is about, getting the excess litter out of the Chesapeake Bay into other areas. But so so county by county, has there been an assessment of where the deficient counties are, so that we know that any kind of possibility of transportation of poultry litter is going to those places that we know are deficient, as opposed to what Adam's just described about Washington County potentially having a surplus?
Yes, analysis has been done. Daryl just posted again, only Page, Rockingham, and Accomack have excess litter in the Bay. This program is all about getting the litter out of those counties and trying to move it to the phosphorus deficient county. And in order to expand the program, we are now looking at any county that does not have excess phosphorus. So really, the big goal is to get it out of those 3 counties and get it to places that do not have the same phosphorus loading.
And is there?
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, the question I had, the follow-up question is, and I'm sorry, I really appreciate the questions being raised on this, because I had looked through it and you're expanding my questions. But is interstate transport into West Virginia from some of those counties that, like when I think about Rockingham and Page in particular, is there any interstate transport potential here?
I'm not sure. I also know that West Virginia's in the Bay watershed too, so some of the counties that would potentially be the most feasible might also be under similar restrictions.
Okay, and I see Bill's note about it not being paid. Okay.
I would clarify that only a small part of eastern West Virginia is in the Bay watershed. Most of West Virginia is in the Ohio River watershed. So
Yeah.
I think it'd be very if we gave them our pollution, but then the Gulf of Mexico people might get irked. So maybe we shouldn't do that.
Well,
Daryl just said interstate, Virginia doesn't pay. It does occur, but this program wouldn't pay for it.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is.
Sorry, go ahead, Clyde.
Hey, this is Clyde. If I could just sort of make a point of order back to Adam's question. I think his question was removing Washington County from the list. As I understanding, we are in the process of discussing proposed amendments to the Bnp Specifications manual that this board will ultimately approve. Christine, you could help me. I don't know that we were going to vote on that today, but certainly the board works on motions. So if someone wanted to make amendments to this, but I think it's good that you're having this discussion because you're understanding more about the lists and why certain counties, and again, just to clarify what Daryl has been adding in the chat, is that we have 3 counties specifically that have too much phosphorus. And so while we're talking about chicken litter, we're talking about phosphorus and getting the phosphorus levels out of that area and 2 counties that have deficiency. However, ultimately, you know, obviously this is science-based, but also the board has the opportunity to represent your interests. So I guess maybe from a point of order standpoint, were we planning on voting on individual sections, or is today just for information, Christine?
No, sir. This is just information only. The vote will come next month, so we have a month to adjust this submission.
So to Mr. Wilson's question, you know, we can evaluate this in the totality over the next month, and then we could entertain motions to make any proposed adjustments to what staff is recommending here.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Is there any further questions from the board on poultry litter?
I had one quick question. This is Jay Ford. To Mr. Wilson's question and comment. How does the board have the authority to take this issue up? You know, how often are we going to review this? Is it going to be every time there's a new appropriation? And just for context, the reason I asked that is a few years back, when we started this conversation about phosphorus saturation in soils on the Eastern Shore, the first pass when we had meetings with agency and industry reps and conservation, everyone said, we don't have too much phosphorus. And about 3 years later, we're sitting in a meeting and everyone said, well, we got to get rid of like 250 tons of manure from this county a year. And the turnaround time on that was not, it was pretty rapid. Or all of a sudden, we were able to absorb all that to, we got to get rid of it at $20 a ton and get it off the Eastern Shore. And so I say that to Mr. Wilson's point, because if they've got a major facility, that's a legitimate concern to say, what is our timeline before we are at phosphorus level? And is it appropriate to be on this list if in 2 to 3 years, someone's going to come back and say, yeah, it turns out we need to get it out of this county. So I just want to provide some historical context as someone that's in a county that had no problem and then overnight had a problem. I think it's important for us to understand what the timeline to reevaluate these decisions is before we consider amendments on who's going to be included or not included.
So there was a period of time that this didn't come up every year, but as we've gotten more funding and with the WIP goals, this has come before the board for sure the last 3 years. I would anticipate it comes before the board every year going forward. It is part of the manual, so it is part of the annual updates and changes that we bring in March for approval in April.
Are there any more?
You're welcome.
The issue isn't going away anytime soon, that's for sure. Are there any more questions on poultry litter of the staff? Moving on to the glossary. We already addressed that?
I've addressed part of it. Part of it was related to the question about the agricultural land and agriculture production. Definitions have been changed to reflect the 3-year participant, or the 3 years in production rather than the 5 years. The applicant's self-certainty of eligibility has been amended to reflect that recommendation as well.
Any other questions? The last section is various documents.
Well, I don't know what else to call them.
I like miscellaneous myself.
Okay, noted. One of them is the schedule. The dates have been updated from 2021 to reflect program year 2022. The table of BMPs revision dates have been updated to reflect this year's changes. Also, language changes have been made to reflect the agricultural tax credit laws. The VAX contracts, there are 3 parts. We've replaced spot checks with verification checks to align with current terminology and procedures. Again, showing the revised definition of agricultural land to reflect the recommendations. We revised the participant cap to reflect recommendation to increase it to 150,000. Language been amended to reflect the tax credit laws. And we've included information related to carryover completion dates to make it easier for districts and others to track when projects are actually supposed to be complete. The last thing in this block is the administrative review checklist. We actually, the CDCs, the Conservation District Coordinators, use this to review districts' files and some of their administrative procedures every year. The results of the checklist are actually one of the grant deliverables. There are minor revisions to address how to handle questions regarding engineering job approval authority. Those should be referred back to the DCR's engineering service members to clarify when resource reviews must be completed. There used to be more overlap than now between the NRCS resource reviews and district DCR resource reviews, to correct the reference to agency names, to remove reference to a Con 6 notes, as those aren't necessarily part of a file, and also those are very NRCS specific titles, and to require the information entered into the AgBnP tracking module is accurate.
Any questions for staff? Well, that concludes the review of the cost share manual amendments, and we have a month to talk about it, think about it, and come back in April and decide what we want to do. Moving on, the agenda item F, approval of small herd initiative.
Yes. You all actually approved the funding for this in December, but to go over a little bit more, small herd it's targeted towards producers with herds of 20 to 35 bovines within the Bay Watershed. Producers must be eligible for funding through the VAX program, which, assuming the recommendation goes forward, now means 3 or more years of $100,000 in verifiable agricultural income on 5 or more contiguous acres of land. There will be 7 districts that this initiative is targeted in: Culpeper, John Marshall, Lord Fairfax, Loudon, Cedar Francisco, Piedmont, and the Bay Watershed only, and Thomas Jefferson. Funding will be available on a first-come, first-served, non-competitive basis, and each participant is eligible only once, with a maximum of $75,000 in cost share. Any of the VAX livestock stream exclusion practices are eligible, and it can fund up to 100% of the cost of the practice, depending on the practice chosen, as well as the buffer width and lifespan options chosen by the participant. If the participant chooses to use this funding source, it will not impact VAX participant caps for other practices. So a producer could actually get $25,000 under the small herd initiative to provide stream exclusion and still get, $125,000 worth of cover crop assistance.
And Christine, just to clarify, the max a producer can get through the small herd initiative is $25,000. Something about 75,000 came out earlier, and it's a little confusing.
I've got too much money in my head. All normal VAX program guidelines apply to the herd initiative: the carryovers, hardship, practice failures, verifications. So these will be checked on, verified, just like a normal VAX practice. Each district is responsible for determining the participant's eligibility for funding. including the VAX eligibility requirements and herd size at the time the contract part 1 is signed. You have a recommended motion to approve the program, and as well as providing the department authorization to develop forms or documents needed to facilitate the implementation, and then the requirement that either grant agreement or memorandum of understanding, whichever is the most appropriate, to be fully executed by the department and the district before any funding is provided to the district for this initiative.
Okay. Is there any questions for staff? The motion as stated is the board approves the small herd initiative as presented by the department. The department is authorized to develop any forms or documents needed to facilitate the implementation of this initiative. Prior to any funding being transferred to the district for this initiative, a grant agreement or a memorandum of understanding, whichever is determined to be the most appropriate, must be fully executed by the department and the district. Does anyone on the board wish to move this motion?
Mr. Chairman, this is Pam Mason. I make the motion.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Is willing to second?
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll ask Michael to call the roll.
Mr. Arneson,
Yes.
Ms. Saki-Blunt,
Yes.
Dr. O'Brien,
Yes.
Ms. Mason,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson,
Yes.
Mr. Newton,
Yes.
Mr. Ford.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, the motion carries.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, item G, approval of the mobilization payment pilot project.
Over the last several years, and we got multiple suggestions in 2020, suggestions requested ways to either spread out cost share payments to improve cash flow for users, and to reduce the tax burden associated with one large cost share payment. The idea is that this would set up similar to NRCS's farm bill contract. DCR is not currently set up to do that, and truthfully, some of our practices aren't set up to be just a component by component practice. Our SL6, one of the livestock stream exclusion practices, comes to mind. However, DCR does recognize the financial impact that some of these more expensive practices have on the producers, as well as, in many instances, contractors request a mobilization fee, either upfront flat rate or percentage-based payment, before they either buy the supplies needed, move staff, move equipment to actually install the practice that the producer is paying for. This mobilization payment pilot project is the department's best effort to try and address this suggestion and concern. It'll provide a partial cost share payment to the producer called a mobilization payment to cover the contractor's mobilization fee. We hope that providing this payment early in the process will enable the producer to work with the contractor more effectively and efficiently, and to have the best management practice installed in a timely manner. Alternatively, in cases where the participant will be doing their own work to install the best management practice, this payment could actually improve the cash flow by allowing for the initial purchasing of materials to begin construction. 4 district boards have officially voted to participate: Daniel Boone, Lonesome Pine, Lord Fairfax, and Peter Francisco. The mobilization payment will be equal to 20% of the eligible estimated instance cost of the BMP, but no more than $20,000. It even the $20,000 cap applies even in cases where the participant signs up for multiple BMPs, such as livestock stream exclusion and an extension of a watering system. It would begin in state program year 2022, so the upcoming year, and would run for 2 program years. There are 13 eligible practices. They are livestock stream exclusion practices and animal waste practices. Any eligible VAX applicant within one of the pilot districts would be eligible to apply as part of the pilot. There are a couple things for participants to keep in their mind if they vote to participate or they opt to participate in this pilot. 1, normal VAX carryover procedures do not apply. Instead, the participants allow 2 full calendar years from the documented intended start date in order to complete their contracts. This may actually be a shorter amount of time than a participant who chooses to enroll in VAX would have, because you can add additional carryovers in the VAX program. In the event that the participant fails to complete their VAX contract within the required time frame, their contract would be canceled. The participant would be responsible for the full return of the mobilization payment directly to the district within 60 days. If the payment is not returned, the participant would be prohibited from receiving any VAX payments for 15 years. However, in highly unusual circumstances, such as life-threatening illness or bankruptcy, the participants in the pilot will still have the option to request forgiveness for the repayment of cost share funds through the hardship process outlined in the VAX manual. Participants will be eligible for payment only after the following conditions. All the standard VAX program requirements are met. Resource reviews, contract signing, all these typical things that happen. The district board formally approves the mobilization practice, including the payment by separate motion recorded in the minutes. All big process requirements are upheld and completed. The participant and district must have received any required engineering designs with signatures for the project, and the participant must submit to the district their intended start date, which includes the participant signature and the contractor signature. District staff will issue the mobilization payment only when all the conditions have been met, but no earlier than 60 days before the documented intended start date. It is also anticipated that the pilot districts and DCR discuss this program throughout its project timeframe to address any anticipated obstacles or issues and any revisions that may need to be improved in its implementation.
Are there any questions for staff?
This is Pam Mason. I have a question.
Yes,
So I'm wondering in the so either the list of the payment timing or in the list of the stipulations for program participation, I don't see there sort of called out what the estimated cost of mobilization is. Now I understand, you know, it's only going to be, it's basically to get money out quicker, and it's capped 20% or $20,000. But it seems that it might be important to have an idea of what those costs are in order to know, you know, how much they compete. Because it occurs to me, working in some similar programs, that sometimes mobilization costs might get buffeted a bit. You know, there might be some sort of, you know, some shell game activities going on wherein, you know, there might be overestimates of mobilization costs in order to sort of buy out the rest of a project, or it might result in the overall cost of the project being slightly higher than it might have been otherwise. And I'm just trying to think if there's a way to sort of build in a little bit more detail to the requirements so that we can maybe hedge against that possibility.
I don't know if it's 20% of the estimated cost. The estimated cost is as much as the district is assuming the practice will cost truly. So is your concern with the 20,000 or the 20%?
So I guess what I'm wondering is if over time, and it wouldn't happen necessarily right away, but perhaps over time what will happen is these practices will start to literally cost more. And then a few years down the line, the board will get a request to increase the cost because the list that the district has to provide for those costs, because the contractors are starting to build in mobilization costs sort of separately and looking at it as an opportunity to make more money on a practice. Perhaps that's not likely to occur. I'm just thinking ahead.
Any thoughts?
This is Charlie Newton. It occurs to me that we're doing a pilot project to learn how this works. So we may need to put more detail in the future, but it seems like for this pilot that this is a good start.
I think I might agree with you, Charlie, but I suppose that if it's a pilot, perhaps all the more reason to ask for some identification of what the estimated portion of the whole cost is the mobilization part, so that we have an understanding how that looks moving forward.
Well, the manual. The total cost will be determined by the district using the manual and the guidelines, right? So and the tracking program. So I understand the concern for requirement creep over time, but that would necessitate a change to the manual.
Correct.
Right? So we would catch that in that. I mean, we will watch it. We will definitely watch it in the 4 districts. I'm very anxious. Peter Francisco's right next to us, and we're anxious to see exactly how it's going to work. I know that individuals who in the past have wanted to do the large animal waste facilities wanted to do it, but they just didn't have upfront capital to start the process. And this would alleviate that thing. But there are a lot of unanswered questions that hopefully we will find out over the pilot 2 years.
And Daryl put a comment in, the 20% of the total contract or $20,000 actually sort of gets the district out of having to estimate the actual mobilization costs and having to negotiate that. Since it's part of the total cost of the practice, if the practice comes in cheaper, then we pay the actual cost. VAX would pay the actual cost, not the estimated. So there's a catch on that. I would say this is probably one of the things that, if the pilot's approved, that going forward we will have conversations with districts about. They'll be the ones to notice quickly whether costs are coming in either at an unusual rate, or if there are more requests for more mobilization fees, or if those requests are coming in high. I think the districts will pick up on that pretty quickly, actually.
Thanks.
One more clarification, Christine. The mobilization payment that's made, whether it's on the 20% or the 20,000 for a large project over 100,000, is really just part of those project costs, right? It doesn't. It's not in addition to the estimated cost. It's just a part of, which then gets evened out when you finish the project and you've added up all the components and all the details of what the project cost. So it's not like we're giving the contractor or the farmer to pay his contractor more money than what was estimated for that project. It's just to get a little bit of the money out to the contractor to buy the equipment or to buy the supplies or move the equipment onto the site.
Correct.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? The recommended motion states the board approve the mobilization payment pilot project as presented by the department. The department is authorized to develop any forms or documents needed to facilitate the implementation of this pilot project. Prior to a district requesting any funds for participation through this pilot project, a grant agreement or memorandum of understanding, whichever is determined to be the most appropriate, must be fully executed by the district or the department. Does anybody on the board care to move that motion?
Delia O'Brien, I move.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second, Adam Wilson.
The motion has been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I will ask Michael to call the roll.
Mr. Arneson,
Yes.
Ms. Seki-Blanc,
Yes.
Dr. O'Brien,
Yes.
Ms. Mason,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson,
Aye.
Mr. Newton,
Yes.
Mr. Ford.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, the motion carries.
Thank you very much. Moving on. Agenda item H, approval of the
Budget template.
the budget template. Something that just really excites your chairman. Go ahead.
Budget template, it's attachment D. I always call it budget template. I don't know why I can't get the attachment D in my head. But it's a district that the department and others use to review and revise the base technical assistance allocations for districts. Districts have been completing these templates for many years now. It's actually also used by our stakeholders and partner organizations to lobby the General Assembly for increased operational funding as well as increased technical assistance funding. This document has been reviewed by the peer review committee, which is made up of DCR and one representative from each area. It was also sent out by the association to all administrative staff of districts. There are two amendments. One is a new column that reflects the that we are asking districts to complete to reflect increased administrative and operations costs associated with increased cost share funding. That would be if it's a $100,000 cost share program, what does that actually mean in terms of your administrative and operational costs? And the second one, a section has been added to try and capture the costs, both personnel costs and travel, associated with dam rehabilitation projects. These are really the large scale projects. They're not typically the all dam repair projects that you all typically approve in December. So these really are the big ones.
And not always funded by DCR either.
Correct.
The dam repair.
Typically NRCS and others.
Yeah.
This is a grant deliverable out of that admin and ops grant. It is the district complete this every 2 years. There will be a webinar training hosted by the association on May 4th to walk districts through how to correctly complete this and answer any questions, confusions, anything that any questions districts may have about this template.
Are there any questions for staff?
Yes, this is Pam Mason. I have a question. It's pretty simple. I'm just wondering, it references the board's established financial allocation policy in like line 4 or 5. Where can I see that, or can you tell me where I can find that?
Sure, it's the, I'll send you the link. It's the cost share and technical assistance policy that's adopted by the board every May. So you'll get a draft one in April, but I can send you the FY21 one.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion? The motion states the Virginia Soil and Water Conservation Board approves the revised Attachment D. Completion of the Attachment D is a grant deliverable under the Department of DCR as Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District Administrative and Operating Support Grant Agreement. Grant deliverable number 8, submitted as a district board for fiscal year 2023 to no later than July 15, 2021. So it's due this July. Would anybody on the board care to move this motion?
I so move Kristen Sackie-Blum.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Thank you. I have a second. Is there any further? Oh, you get it? Okay. We have a motion and second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll ask Michael to call the roll.
Mr. Arneson,
Yes.
Ms. Sackie-Blunt,
Yes.
Dr. O'Brien,
Yes.
Ms. Mason,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson,
Aye.
Mr. Newton,
Yes.
Mr. Ford.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, the motion carries.
Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is the approval of district directors' resignations and appointments.
Yep. Y'all do this pretty much every meeting.
Yeah. Are there any questions? We have
resignations from Colonial and Patrick, and appointments from Big Walker and Eastern Shore. Oh, and Piedmont.
Okay. Any questions?
Motion to approve. Adam Wilson.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Elliot
Second.
O'Brien, second.
The motion has been approved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none.
For
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, this is Pam Mason. I just want to acknowledge the service of Dick Phillips in the district, Colonial District. Would be sorely missed.
Thank you very much. Is there any further comment? Hearing none, I'll ask Michael to call the roll.
Mr. Arneson,
Yes.
Ms. Sackie-Blunt,
Yes.
Dr. O'Brien,
Yes.
Ms. Mason,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson,
Aye.
Mr. Newton,
Yes.
Mr. Ford.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, the motion carries.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda, approval of initiative of periodic, nutrient management training and certification regulations. Nutrient management plans.
Yep. We brought a motion in December to start a periodic review of the public participation guidelines for this board. That public comment period should have opened yesterday, actually. So, as promised, here is the request to start a periodic review for the nutrient management training and certification regulations. These regulations really govern the department's voluntary nutrient management training and certification programs for individuals who prepare the nutrient management plans. We are expecting comments on this periodic review, so I am sure we will have follow-up issues to bring to the board for to be addressed.
Okay.
I have a
Any
question.
questions? Go ahead.
Thank you. This is Kristen. So is there targeted outreach to all those who are certified to invite their input, or would they only receive, I mean, how is the outreach for inviting input conducted? Is it directed in the program?
At a minimum, it will be out on the town hall and published in the Virginia Register. We haven't talked about more than that. We can surely have discussions about notifying the certified nutrient management planners.
So I think that would be important because they're going into a very busy season and may not be following the opportunity to weigh in on this. And it seems like that's the audience that really needs to be pulled in for providing their comments.
I would agree with Miss Saki Blanc's comments there. If it's sort of put on the Federal Register and people have to go find it, some folks might not take the time or might not keep that on their radar, and perhaps another kind of distribution of that information, or more than one other kind of distribution, might be appropriate, just to make sure that you get the right folks engaged.
Okay. Yeah, staff can do that. Yeah. We'll come up with it. Okay, come up with a plan. Are there any further questions for the staff? The recommended motion states that this board approve the periodic review of the nutrient management training certification regulations. The board requests a report from the department regarding specific issues that were raised during the periodic review after the closure of the public comment period. Does anybody care to move that motion?
So moved, Kristen Saki-Blanc.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second, Pam Mason.
Oh.
Okay. Get that. Okay. So we have the motion has been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? It should be noted in the minutes that we will reach out to the current certified planners to make sure that they are aware of the comment period. Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll ask Michael to call the roll.
Mr. Arneson?
Yes.
Ms. Saki Blanc?
Yes.
Dr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Ms. Mason?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Aye.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, the motion carries.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the Timberlake Watershed Improvement District budget. As you remember, we have approved Timberlake Watershed Improvement District. We had them visit us, and they're now moving forward.
Yes. I submitted a ton of documents I got from Mr. Schrader, who's one of the WID trustees. Permits have been acquired. They've got the Virginia Water Protection Permit, their Stormwater Construction Permit, and the local E&S Erosion Sediment Control Permit. Additionally, you got the loan documentation. The rate is under 8%, which is what it's required to be in 10.1-633. We received all of the documents on March 4th. I worked with the Attorney General's office to come up with the motion. So I think we're good.
Okay.
The one thing, Paul, I think you're on the phone. Correct me if I'm wrong, or if this isn't necessarily. The motion references back to a budget that was submitted by Robert E. Lee Soil and Water Conservation District and presented by the Timberlake District trustees. Should we put in there on September 23rd, 2020, reflect that that's when they presented it rather than today?
I mean, I don't think it makes any legal significance, but it would be a more accurate motion.
Okay.
So the motion as stands, right?
No, he said it'd be more accurate. So let's do that. So for the board, after trustees, we will insert as on September 23rd, 2020, to reflect the day the WID actually presented their information and budget to y'all.
Okay. So the motion is amended.
Thank you, Paul.
States that we approve the budget that was, we approved the budget that was already approved. But it also approves all the other documents. They have all the permits in place. So the motion is that we allow them to go forward, right?
The motion is what's in, it's
Right.
the motion in front of you. Yes, it allows them to go forward
Right.
with y'all's approval.
So the motion is presented, the Soil and Water Conservation Board approves Timberlake Watershed budget that was previously approved by this board and presented to Timberlake District as copies approved environmental permits and loan documents demonstrating statutory compliance were provided as of for April. That is for March 2021. I'm getting ahead of myself. That is the motion. Does anyone on the board care to move that?
So, Mr. Chair, I believe it includes the amendment after comma trustees as presented in September board meeting. And I would move that amended motion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Charles, no, second that.
Thank you.
The motion has been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll ask Michael to call the roll.
Mr. Arneson,
Yes.
Ms. Saki-Blanc,
Yes.
Dr. O'Brien,
Yes.
Ms. Mason,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson,
Aye.
Mr. Newton,
Yes.
Mr. Ford.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, the motion carries.
I want to thank everyone for helping us today get through the agenda item. We've now come to the public comment portion. Is there anything in the chat box?
Nope.
The next meetings are scheduled for April 21st, 2021 and May 20th, 2021. It will be in the same format that we are using today. Maybe sometime in the future we will get together in person. Does anybody on the board have any other comments or suggestions before I adjourn?
just
Mr.
wanted to-
Chairman, if we'd like to thank the staff for all of the preparation of this significant body of work. And thank you for your diligence.
Thank you. Thank you, Christine, Blair, and Michael, and everybody that put this all together. It took a village, that's. Is there anything else for the good of the order from the board?
Hey,
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to flag something real quick from the General Assembly. And I'm hoping that it not making it into Clyde's report doesn't mean he's going to try and veto it. But there was legislation from Senator Lewis this year to convene a carbon sequestration work group with named members from both the Soil and Water Conservation District, agribusiness, Farm Bureau, forestry, and the goal of that group is really to take a comprehensive look at sequestration through natural resources in the Commonwealth, how that dovetails and has co-benefits with the work we currently do on water quality, nutrient, and sediment removal, and also ways to incentivize sequestration. And I think most of the folks on this are aware that there's a lot of energy at the federal level around soil sequestration in particular. And so the hope is that that bill is going to help jumpstart the process for the Commonwealth and make sure that we're in a good position to take advantage of action on the federal level. So I wanted to flag that for the board members and something that I hope they all pay attention to as it proceeds and engage the process where possible.
Thank you. Excellent point. Yes.
So, Mr. Ford, you left wetlands out of the list again. Sorry. Just want to point that out.
Yes, you're very, very consistent. And wetlands also do an excellent job of sequester and carbon.
Daryl, I hope you're still on the phone. Charles put a question in the chat box about why must the tillage residue survey be completed prior to the cover crop survey as described in your report?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Newton, that's really simply a matter of available budget. We had slightly over $50,000 in grant money this fiscal year and again next fiscal year, and had to divide up the 2 surveys just because of the funding. But because of the delay necessitated by COVID-19 safety protocols, we shall take a look at whether or not they can be combined when we revisit this a little less than a year from now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? The chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second,
I
Adam
second.
Wilson.
Hearing multiple seconds, I declare this meeting adjourned.
Goodbye,
Thank
all.
you very much,
Bye.
everyone,
Thank
for
you,
attending.
Murphy.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.